Here at the Maudsley Hospital, I had access to patients for whom the world has become utterly changed. Particularly interesting to me were people with either tumors or strokes, because there you can localize where the damage is. You can see it in a scan, and you can then see what happens to that patient. Good science starts from a really intriguing question. Why is the brain divided? I never heard that asked in any of my training. It's really what I've been thinking about all my life, about these two different ways in which we seem to inhabit the world. That was the beginning of a 20-year-long process in which I tried to apply myself to the question of what the differences between these two hemispheres really were.
Everything we human beings ever do, no matter how ordinary it seems, has a complex beginning in our brains. Finding out how the brain does this work is a study that has fascinated scientists for centuries.
The brain is, of course, an enormously complex structure. In fact, it's kind of redundantly complex. We have two cerebral hemispheres, but it becomes a fascinating question to know whether the two cerebral hemispheres can operate separately.
In the 60s and 70s in California at Caltech, there was some incredibly important and fascinating work. And what they were trying to do was to improve the quality of life for people with intractable epilepsy. Now, these people might have almost continuous epileptic seizures, which meant that they couldn't really carry on any kind of normal life.
The original idea was based on the notion that if you isolated a seizure to one half the brain so it could not spread to the other half brain, when a seizure occurred, you would prevent a generalized convulsion. It wouldn't spread throughout the brain, the patient wouldn't lose generalized consciousness, and you would have helped.
Today, Michael Gadzanica is a world-renowned neuroscientist and vineyard owner. In the 1960s, he was a grad student participating in radical brain experiments.
By sectioning this structure, as can be seen in this half-brain section, called the corpus callosum, and it has over 2 million nerve fibers, and they richly interconnect the two halves of the brain.
What they did was, with some trepidation initially, to divide this corpus callosum, the main pathway by which the two hemispheres communicate. And what they found after the operation was that the seizures largely stopped. The other thing was, it was possible, by setting up carefully controlled experiments, to find out what the reactions of the left and the right hemisphere were independently.
Each side of the brain controls the opposite side of the body. So the left hemisphere controls the right side of the body, and the right hemisphere communicates with the left.
The patient looks at a screen, just imagine, fixate on a dot, and over here we flash a picture of an apple. So if it's in the right visual field, that goes to your left brain. Left brain's got language of speech. Patient said that's an apple. This time you put the apple over in the left visual field. That now goes to the right disconnected brain. And you say to the patient, what'd you see? And the patient says, I didn't see anything.
Something on the left, I don't know what it is, I can't say it. I wonder what I can. I don't know what it is.
What's it have to do with?
So I can't tell you that either.
They found that the left arm and the right arm seemed to be contradicting one another. So somebody would select a dress with her right arm, and the left arm would take it back and put it on the shelf and take out another one.
Frustrated.
The experiments proved that we have two brains in our heads, not just one. But they do not see the world the same way.
When I started to do psychiatry, nothing much was said about what the mass of the right hemisphere did. My training was that the left hemisphere was very important for understanding and language and for speaking language. But really, what went on in the right hemisphere was not that significant. Michael Gadzanica had said that the right hemisphere of the human brain had about as much intelligence as a chimpanzee. So that wasn't encouraging.
Well, I used to give a lecture, The Left Hemisphere, Don't Leave Home Without It. And that summarized the importance I saw to the special modules, we call them now, systems in the left hemisphere. That's where the heavy-duty lifting comes for our complex cognitive life.
But in this experiment with a split brain patient, while the right hemisphere is trying to make the cube, the left hemisphere's hand keeps interfering because it doesn't know what it's doing. Yet the right hemisphere on its own solves the problem in seconds.
All of those who were involved in the team came to the conclusion that each hemisphere had, if you like, a different way of looking at the world.
You separate the two hemispheres, you got mine left, you got mine right. It's what grabbed everybody's interest. Everybody can understand that. And so, well, one of the left talks and is analytical, and the right is creative and pulls stuff together. And boom, it was an industry.
Thanks to pop psychology, the right and left hemispheres became cartoon characters. It was no longer considered serious science.
The left does language and reason, and the right does airy-fairy pictures and emotion. And that turned out not to be right. Because what people found was that over time, it was obvious that each hemisphere engages in everything. So each hemisphere, right and left, is involved in reason and in language and in emotion, but in crucially different ways.
Although the pop culture understanding of the left and right hemisphere was eventually rejected, a central question still remained.
Why does the brain have two centers of consciousness, each capable of maintaining consciousness on its own, involved in everything, but in a different way? But it was only when I came to look at the animal literature that the penny dropped.
Professor Gunther Kuhn.
Hey, Ian.
How nice of you to see
Hey,
you.
absolutely. Fantastic having you
Lovely to
here.
meet you.
Absolutely. Same with me.
I apologize for our delays, but
No problem at all.
I was-
This university is a maze.
it's completely lost.
It's an absolute maze. Now,
Dr. Onar Gunchukun is a leading researcher in the field of animal neurology. He focuses on how birds use each half of their brain.
These are the animals with the eye rings.
Using the Velcro, you can cover one eye at a time.
Exactly. So there is a little cap that we have, and then the animal just sees with its left or right eye. Because as you know, the optic nerves cross completely.
Yes.
So everything the right eye sees goes to the left hemisphere and vice versa.
Gunchukun devised a test where pigeons were trained to recognize human beings in vacation photos. Each time the birds recognized there was a person in a picture, they were rewarded.
After a while, they start to understand there are pictures with humans and there are pictures without humans.
But then the birds were given a harder challenge.
Now we can start to alter the pictures. We cut out the head, we cut out the arm, we cut out the trunk, and spread it across the picture. It is like a slaughtering scene. We take the pictures and chop them in smaller and smaller and smaller pieces. The left hemisphere says, okay, I see a head, I see eyes, I see nose, that's a human, I'm packing on it. The right hemisphere now says, this is no human anymore. The right hemisphere requires the correct position of the human body to recognize the human. So that means both hemispheres are doing an excellent job. Both hemispheres contribute. And both hemispheres can decide human or non-human, but they do it with different cognitive strategies. When pigeons are up to find food, they have to discriminate grain from pebbles, so that one hemisphere is really concentrating on the tiny little details of the food while the other one is glancing into the environment and is on quick alert if an aerial predator is coming.
This is fundamental to survival, and that was the moment at which I realized this is profoundly important to all beings that have to solve the conundrum of how to eat and stay alive.
McGilchrist realized that in human beings, these two different kinds of attention played out in much more complex ways.
You won't find a neurologist anywhere in the world who will dispute that there is different kinds of attention paid by the left and right hemisphere. Then very clearly, each hemisphere must find a different world. What would those two worlds look like?
McGilchrist observed that the left hemisphere gives narrow, sharply focused attention to detail, without understanding the larger context. It sees objects in relation to their usefulness. It's in charge of the right hand, which has the power to manipulate things, such as tools and technology. But it can't make human connections. It doesn't understand relationships, humor, tone of voice. Things and people are not unique and individual, but groups that it can organize, sort, and file in a system of rules and linear connections. On its own, it has no sense of the whole. Even people are seen as body parts. The world of the left hemisphere is lifeless. It shatters the world into an assortment of bits without meaning. The right hemisphere, by contrast, sees the broad view of the world. It is the master of the brain. It perceives an interconnected world. It understands relationships, body language, facial expression, and implicit meaning. The right hemisphere engages with life, understands movement, story, and metaphor. It perceives how humanity fits into the whole of creation. The divided brain gives us two types of attention, two ways of engaging with the world. It has made us the most powerful species on Earth. But the left hemisphere's narrow kind of attention reminded McGilchrist of something else. Our world.
I began thinking about how in public life everything has become more regulated, more rule-bound, more explicit. For the last 100 years, a way of thinking which is reductive, mechanistic, has taken us over. It's enabled us to manipulate the world, to grab resources, to become wealthy. But it's also meant that we've lost the means to feel satisfaction and fulfillment through our place in the world.